The best of money matters. The big story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin, Jeong. In recent weeks, the Philippines has witnessed a surge in public outrage directed at individuals dubbed nepo babies, children or relatives of politicians and influential figures who are allegedly benefiting from government infrastructure deals. The controversy intensified following revelations that 545 billion pesos, or about 9.5 billion US dollars, have been allocated to flood management projects since 2022, with a significant proportion of the funds concentrated among a few contractors. This has led to widespread criticism and calls for accountability. But why has the backlash against the nepo babies in the Philippines become so intense? Should they be held accountable for the actions of their families, or is this mostly a reflection of public frustration with systemic corruption? Well, joining us today to share more is Dr. Aries Arugay, who is the visiting senior fellow at the ICS Yusuf Ishak Institute. Hi, Dr. Arugay. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
All right, just to start off here, why has this particular issue of corruption from the flood control projects in the Philippines blown up on social media? What's the context here with regarding the flood control projects?
Right. Corruption is not really a stranger in Philippine politics. It has almost become normalized and somehow a defining feature of governance in the country. But I think a combination of factors resulted to the limelight that anomalous implementation of infrastructure projects, including flood control projects, have emerged. It has something to do with the pronouncement of the president during his annual speech at the opening of Parliament or Congress, when he basically shamed a lot of these politicians over flood control projects. But the weather, literal weather during the time, was that there was a typhoon or a storm that ravaged through the country that caused a lot of flooding, together with monsoon rains that have worsened given climate change. So this combination of factors somehow resulted in this new cycle of public outrage about corruption. And so much so that there's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of current investigations. And on social media, it blasted into some form of expression of this disappointment, not only with the government, but with the current slew of politicians in power.
Okay. Philippine social media was abuzz in the past week with the collective slamming and calling out of these so-called nepo babies of related politicians and private contractors. So, doctor, why have nepo babies emerge as the main targets of public anger rather than the politicians themselves?
Right. The nepo babies, quote unquote, this might refer to relatives or to children of politicians. But when I mentioned earlier that corruption is a defining feature of our country's politics, the other defining feature is dynastic politics. That instead of political parties in the Philippines, we have political dynasties who have dominated politics for decades. And to a certain extent, these nepo babies, some of their parents or some of their relatives are part of these dynasties. So while these nepo babies literally might mean young children of politicians, nepo babies in general refer to dynasts or scions of political families. What really is interesting in social media is that them being called out is because of the very, you might say, vulgar and insensitive displays of this affluence that is in fact against the law. There is a law that relatives of politicians, not only politicians themselves, should conduct themselves in a manner of simple living. So this IG post of designer bag, of traveling to Paris and through Europe at the literal backs of suffering Filipinos who are mostly don't have enough to get on with the day is a glaring visual but also literal, you might say, picture that tells you that in politics, those who have power really live a different lifestyle from the ordinary Filipino.
Okay. Some netizens argue that these children are complicit by enjoying their wealth tied to questionable contracts. So do you think that the scrutiny is fair, or is it going a little too far? Should they even be held responsible for such corruption, though?
Now, of course not. They don't have any direct involvement. So I think the responsibility falls squarely on their parents. On the one hand, by not teaching them that as public servants, they should be able to comport themselves in a manner that reflects the office that their parents are occupying. So this is a false socialization and of rearing up their own children. But also it has something to do with some of these nepo babies are not really that young. And it's basic knowledge how, unlike in Singapore, how low the salaries of civil servants are. And therefore, if you're in high school or in university and you see your parents working at the Internal Revenue Service or in a public office, and you know for a fact that the salaries are low, and yet you have all these luxury cars, you are afforded these lavish trips abroad, you get to buy your designer clothes that you can flaunt on Instagram and other social media handles. I think even if you're just a teenager, questions are being raised to your mind. I mean, I don't think anyone would simply just dismiss and say that, oh, my parents are rich or something like that. So they're not directly at fault, but because of the parents. But I also think that it has become so normalized that in the Philippines, regardless of where you got your money, you have every privilege in life. You get to show this in a society that is highly unequal. We have very rich Filipinos, but you have a lot more, many more poor Filipinos who are surviving day to day.
I mean, one of the personalities users have called out is Claudine Ko, who frequently posts about her lavish lifestyle. So, Doctor, how is her family linked to the recent corruption case, and what kind of hate has she been receiving online?
Well, I mean, the interesting dimension to the current scandalous corruption allegations is that the family of the one that you mentioned is, one, a political dynasty. Second, they're not just political dynasts, but they are contractors, meaning they engage government in providing and implementing some of these infrastructure projects. The father, I think, if not the patriarch of the dynasty, was chair of the budget committee of the entire House of Representatives. And therefore, I think there's a lot of attention because it's all of the above in terms of combination. A politician, a dynasty, a contractor that were able to get billions of dollars of contracts. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the consistency of their lavish lifestyle with the infrastructure projects. And then you have all these flooding wherein hundreds and thousands of Filipinos are being evacuated. Some even died because of the flooding. So this outrage being channeled, it's not really collateral damage, but at the same time, if optics is being shown, I mean, they're easy targets because their IGs are on display. Unlike their politician fathers, they don't have IGs. The children does.
Well, another personality under backlash is Jella Alonte, the daughter of Mayor Angelo Alonte of Binyan, Laguna. But her father is not linked to any flood control projects under investigation. So, Doctor, why is she under scrutiny as well? Does this suggest that the debate over nepo babies and political accountability has expanded to include the families of politicians more broadly, regardless of direct involvement to the recent scandal?
Right. I mean, at the moment, there might not be any direct link. But of course, investigations are ongoing. It's the same case, meaning she comes from a political dynasty, one. And second, it has something to do, I think, with the larger part of the outrage. It's not simply that, oh, you have all these nepo babies and their politicians living the lifestyle of the rich and famous over taxpayers' money. But the timing itself, I think that her case has something to do with at the height of the flooding in her own hometown of Binyan, Laguna, she was posting stuff. She was posting of the lavish lifestyle that she is living and the luxury that she is enjoying. And to juxtapose that with the hundreds of thousands of her father, of her family's constituents, who are the ones paying for the salaries of the politician parents and allegedly funding this lifestyle. I think the outrage is they're not directly linked, but it has also something to do with the inability of these nepo babies to somehow have empathy at the height of the flooding and the monsoon rains when Filipinos' precarity are on the line and there was instant suffering. And yet they get to post on IG stories about how lavish their daily living is compared to the suffering of many Filipinos.
I understand. Well, then overall, to what extent has this online backlash, though, crossed into cyberbullying versus being a legitimate form of public accountability? I mean, I believe that some of these influencers or personalities, they have privated their accounts. So is it tapping into something deeper like privilege and inequality?
Definitely. The Philippines is one of the most unequal
Hmm.
societies in the world today. And this has not been addressed. And this is why you seem to have two countries: the countries wherein many poor and ordinary Filipinos live, a country wherein the rich and the politically powerful thrive so much. You're correct. This online outrage, I think, must be translated to actual accountability, because if not, this is just a fleeting moment. Sooner or later, the outrage will disappear. People will, will attend to other things and will forget. This must be channeled into actual accountability, because, again, the third already mentioned corruption, dynasties, the third element of Philippine politics is impunity.
Hmm.
The law is not enforced equally, particularly to those who are the rich and powerful. So this calling out, this outrage, even our own president, must be translated into actual cases being filed, actual sanctions being meted out. Because if not, it will just be a cycle. Because public outrage already happened 15 years ago when almost a million Filipinos marched on the streets because of pork barrel corruption scandals. This is no different. So there must be something beyond expressing outrage online. And this has something to do with really making these politicians accountable, because if you met out sanctions, then politicians will be deterred. And perhaps they will teach their children better ways of behaving online and making sure that in the Philippines, a public office remains a public trust.
Okay. So, what is likely to happen to the officials implicated in these projects and to their children who are being called out? Is any of the, public outrage making a difference at the moment?
Well, at the moment, there's a lot of investigations going on, and there are a lot of skepticism on this, because the people who are investigating, there are insinuations that they might themselves be involved. So the lack of an independent, highly credible body to really get to the bottom of how rampant and how widespread the corruption is, even in just flood control projects. We're not even talking about public spending in general. What about the other projects on infrastructure? What about other social services? For sure, if there's something on flood control, there might be a similar trend or a similar phenomenon in the other ways public money is being spent. So, in other words, it remains to be seen whether there's an actual result to this, something concrete, something institutionalized. Because at the moment, unfortunately, many of those who wanted to get at the bottom of this, the politicians themselves, are not seen to be credible enough to be leading this accountability campaign.
Well, have any of these nipple babies or their families come forward publicly to respond to or deny these allegations?
Well, in fact, I haven't seen any. Most of them are, in fact, saying that they've been shamed. This is taking a toll on their mental health, etc. But, corruption is a vicious cycle. And this mental health issue, I think, what about the mental health of all those who have been victimized because of fraudulent ghost projects, those who have been flooded, those whose houses have been submerged in water? What about their mental health and their actual physical health?
Right.
So I think at the end, the defense against this must go beyond simply that we're being bullied. Because if really you're innocent, then sooner or later the truth will come out. But that really depends on whether the people really want the truth to come out, and whether the politicians in power really can know the truth, or, as what that Hollywood movie said, can they handle the truth? Can Philippine society handle the truth if it's proven that corruption is so rampant? Will they not vote for these politicians ever again? Will they vote for leaders who will implement good governance? I think that's the question.
Well, another important question here is that, when it comes to cancel culture, people try to cancel one influencer and then that quickly fades away. People forget about it. So after all the online call outs and public outrage, what happens when the attention fades? How do these fleeting moments of social media activism shape or, fail to shape real accountability in the Philippines?
That's right. So, in fact, this spark of outrage must be seen as an opportunity for really a serious accountability campaign, activating institutions, implementing law, enforcing sanctions, and making sure that it's not a selective witch hunt, meaning those who are allied with incumbent administration are protected, while this accountability campaign is being used as a weapon against the political opponents of the government of the day. And second, that this will really result in improvements in the implementation of projects, particularly those funded by the government, because if it's still the same MO, the same modus operandi, then there's not really going to be change. We're outraged right now, but the sentiment will be fleeting. So unless some sanctions will be meted, those who are really involved and those who really stolen public money gets to pay for it. And second, that there will be improvements in transparency in the implementation of these projects and the way the government's budget is being formed, then we'll just repeat the same vicious cycle over and over again.
Right. I mean, several local leaders have also weighed in on the saga, saying corruption should be seen as something unacceptable and disgusting to society. So beyond public shaming, what other systemic reforms do you think are needed to ensure transparency and accountability in projects like these, Doctor? I mean, can it help evolve into more concrete policy plans?
Right. The big difference, perhaps, of Philippine politics with more mature democracies or societies is that the laws are effectively implemented. As far as laws are concerned, whether they have the code of conduct of public officials or in the procurement process, on paper we have very strict standards. The main problem is whether these are really fully implemented. So the implementation, the gap between what exists by law and what is being implemented and enforced is a huge deficit, a huge gap. And moving forward, if we want to move forward as a society that really has had enough of corruption, this gap needs to be narrowed. Second is that we need to select better leaders. Because unfortunately, a lot of these nepo babies, the parents of these nepo babies, always win elections in one way or another because they have so much resources that they can buy votes. They have so much resources that they can buy their opponents from not even contesting the seats that they have. So, in other words, politics cannot just be about how power is exercised. It's about to whom are the voters giving the power to. Because if we keep electing them into office, these type of politicians, then we're not really going anywhere.
All right, some great insights from you there. Thank you so much, Dr. Arugay, for your time and your insights today.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. That was Dr. Aries Arugay, visiting senior fellow of ISIA's Yusof Ishak Institute. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.